Well, hey there. How's it going today? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Simeon here with you today. I want to talk a little bit about this post that I put on my blog about some of the strange and exotic properties of Bigfoot encounters and other types of cryptids that people experience, and how we can kind of make sense of this given what we understand about matter, new states of matter that are being discovered, and some of their properties, specifically some of the research that's been done into coherent and structured water. Now, there was a development a few days ago from Microsoft about Majorana 1 quantum computing system that they've been working on. You know, all these different companies and the aerospace companies that they're partnered with, some of them are partnered with, have been working on different attempts to create quantum computers, which are computing systems that instead of having bits like we have in our ordinary classical computers that are either in a 0 or a 1 state, these bits are in a superposition. They're kind of in a many world state all the time, and just with a few of these bits, because they're in a superposition, both zeros and ones at the same time, they're extremely fast. They can compute with a lot of power that classical computers in theory don't have. And these quantum computers are still being developed. I've talked to people who work in this field, and they tell me it's still a long way off to have error-free quantum computing so that the bits, don't cohere with the side of the wall or other objects and lose their superposition, which they can do pretty easily. So Microsoft said, particularly this post from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, said they had this quantum computing breakthrough, and they are using another system than Google and some of the other companies that have been attempting to create quantum computers. They're using what have been called topological insulators, but these are actually like superconductors. And Microsoft calls them topoconductors, which is actually kind of a better name than topological insulators, because they conduct with a superconductivity on the edge of materials. And through the structure of the materials, you can create this superconducting circuit and use topological conductors to go into a superposition. And then if you have millions of these little bits, Microsoft says they're working on a 1 million bit topoconductor supercomputer, then you would sort of have this quantum computer in this sort of huge superposition state where some people like David Deutsch and others have argued this sort of proves the existence of multiverses, because where are these computers when they're in this superposition, especially with 1 million bits, where the positions are both simultaneously zeros and ones at the same time, until they kind of settle down into a particular solution for whatever they're working on. In any case, the main thing that caught my interest here is how Nadella starts his post on Twitter X. He says, a couple reflections on the quantum computing breakthrough we just announced. Most of us grew up learning that there are 3 main types of matter that matter: solid, liquid, and gas. Today, that changed. And then he goes into how they've been developing a new state of matter, a new class of materials that he calls topo conductors, Majorana 1, of course, named after Ettore Majorana, an Italian scientist from maybe a little less than 100 years ago, who posited the idea of particles being their own antiparticle at the same time. Kind of an interesting idea, right? Rather than something like Paul Dirac talked about matter and another class of particles, which Dirac is known for discovering, antimatter, which was discovered just a few years after Dirac predicted that antimatter would exist. these were seen in cosmic background radiation, positrons. The Majorana particles are actually both matter and antimatter at the same time, and Microsoft is using that name to kind of, drum up some excitement for their topological conductors here. But for our purposes, I just think it's very interesting, having argued in my book Dark Matter Monsters that there are other states of matter that even life forms, creatures on Earth could be using to sort of manifest their paranormal skills. It's just interesting. You have a major tech company here that is saying that they've invented a new state of matter, because I think Nadella is absolutely right. There's much more than solid, liquid, and gas. We know there's another fourth state of matter that is, non-controversial, the plasma state of matter, by far the most abundant state of matter in the universe, which forms nebulas, and we see it as lightning and the fluorescent light tubes, and even flames, candle flames, are considered to be a type of plasma in some circumstances, a plasma being an electrically excited gas. So plasmas are considered to be aurora borealis, the predominant form of matter in the universe. Like more than 99% of the mass of the universe are these ionically excited gases. But there's actually a fifth state of matter, and this is something I talked about in the Paranormal Bigfoot movie, that, if you'll remember, we talked about the idea of coherent matter. This is the idea of matter that is resonating at the same frequencies because the particles are at the same temperature, or vibrating at the same frequency. And when the particles do that, they sort of cohere and become more like a wave. They become into this wave-like state. And this was first proposed by Bose and Einstein when they proposed their Bose-Einstein condensate, I believe in sometime around 1930 or so. And then decades later, it's discovered in a NIST lab in Boulder, Colorado, the Bose-Einstein condensate, which occurs at near absolute zero temperatures, Kelvin, and it's often the case that the Bose-Einstein condensate is just pulsed. It doesn't exist in a permanent state. But this is an example of coherent matter. You could think of it classically, just as an analogy, like flocks of birds, right? Murmurations of birds, where they all seem to move as one across the sky. When they turn, one of them turns, they all turn at once in those beautiful patterns. Or schools of fish. And this is talked about in the Lockheed Martin patent on how to make coherent matter wave beams, which Lockheed Martin in this patent from a few years ago said they could create coherent matter. Why does this? What is the significance of all this? Well, coherent matter processes allow the usual laws of reality that we see around us to change. Because once something reaches that state of coherency, it becomes very focused, it can become controllable from a distance, and it can do things that ordinary matter can't do. Think of lasers, for example. We're used to light in the ambient environment that just flows around in different directions, sort of chaotically. But laser light is like coherent matter light, where the particles, the photons, are at the same frequency and they have that sort of focused directional effect. And this is why this is significant for us. Because many people who've experienced what we call paranormal phenomena, interestingly enough, report the same types of experiences. In particular, in Bigfoot, for example, People report the environment getting suddenly cold, that the creatures look really dark, like darker than the background that they're in, even darker than trees at night. This is really sort of, they describe it as sort of like sometimes like a dark blob. Okay? And then there is this sudden silence that seems to descend on the area as people have their Bigfoot encounter. They experience this sudden silence in the area before they encounter the creatures. And I should point out that people who've been around ball lightning also experience this same sort of sudden silence. And people have wondered whether it's a type of infrasound coming from the Bigfoot creatures to suppress sound or what's actually going on. Well, in looking at a author, I came across a researcher a number of years ago, Gerald Pollack. He spoke in 2015 at the Society for Scientific Exploration meetings in Washington, D.C. He talked about a fourth phase of water. And looking at his book recently, it really seemed to me that he's talking about another type of coherency, another phase of water that gives it this electrically charged property that also changes the space that it's in because it absorbs radiant energy, infrared energy, and energy in the environment to give the water a type of charge. The fourth state of water, what Pollack calls structured water, some people have called exclusion zone water, is a charge-separated state of water where the positive and negative charges separate, and they give a structure to the water because it lines up according to this sort of electromagnetic influence along tubes and in different structures in very organized ways. And it exists between the solid and the liquid state. So as water's moving from a liquid to a solid state, it goes through this other structured water state, which what gives liquid such interesting properties, especially liquids that are starting to freeze and so forth. And in the fourth phase of water, Pollack goes through all these paradoxes about water, which you and I are very familiar with, that have always been very puzzling, like why the solid state of water takes up more space than liquid, when in all other materials we know the solid state takes up less space. Why liquid ice is slippery, what gives it that slipperiness when most solids, don't seem slippery at all. How water is able to climb in trees up from roots up to hundreds of feet in height. How does the water keep moving up against the forces of gravity? Why do vapors from your cup of coffee seem to come up in a stream rather than just dissipate? Why do we have singular clouds in the sky? Why do we have clouds at all? If it's a vapor, why isn't it just dispersing like other vapors would do? You'll notice if you have a humidifier in your house, the water sort of disperses. So what keeps clouds together? It's all these different types of paradoxes, all the way to why you get little bubbles in champagne glasses. Why do you get bubbles at all in boiling water if it's just the gaseous form of water is at this tiny molecular state? Why is it forming bubbles that you can even see with your eyes? So going through all these paradoxes, Pollack shows that there's a great deal of research over the years showing that water can form these structured hexagonal sheets, and you get these protons between them that give them some flexibility and also the properties of a solid at the same time. It's the reason that something like yogurt holds together, which is like, for most types of yogurt, 85% water. How come it's just not going all over the place but staying in a nice little clump on your spoon while you're eating it? So the answer to some of these questions is that this fourth state of water absorbs energy from the environment, and this allows water to charge like a battery and give it an actively electromagnetic state. And according to Pollock, this is like total heresy in physics and engineering, which has been dominated by equilibrium thermodynamic thinking ever since Maxwell and Boltzmann and researchers back then 150 years ago, this idea that nature is at this equilibrium state. This is something that resonates with me because when I was back in graduate school in the 80s, I was looking at fractal geometry. We knew about far from equilibrium structures, things like you and me, which are changing heat and modifying heat and radiating heat and never coming to an equilibrium state with our environment. That's how we continue to exist. And there was a author at the time who's written some great, even recent books about this, Ilya Prigogine, who wrote about far from equilibrium structures. So once we realized that any sort of living biological organism contains this structured water systems within it, it allows organisms in some conditions to absorb energy and get energy directly from their environments. And that's sort of what we're looking for here. That makes it much easier to believe why Bigfoot and cryptids could have these superhuman abilities that we've all heard about. Their ability, huge amounts of strength, their ability to run at highway speeds, lift huge objects, make these growl howls, huge loud sounds that people say are louder than a freight train, and yet someone even 100 feet away doesn't hear it, like a focused type of sound. So in addition to the types of coherent matter that we've been talking about on this channel with relation to different types of paranormal phenomena, which do allow for cloaking and invisibility and action at a distance, and coherent reactions that are driven by charge clusters and vortex-shaped systems, objects that Bob Greenyer has talked about on the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. In living systems, we also have an engine that sort of drives these charge clusters and coherent matter. It could be happening in you and me right now. And it would just seem that some biological organisms can even do this better and more in a more focused and intense way than you and I are even aware of. Pollock mentioned some of these types of deep sea creatures like tube worms and other types of creatures in the deep sea that he suggests, contrary to what we read about on Wikipedia, what we've been told, that they're using chemosynthesis, just sort of generating energy from volcanic vents down there and chemicals and so forth. He says they're literally absorbing the radiant energy from their environment and converting it through structured water, exclusion zone water, into energy directly. They're taking the radiant energy from the environment and turning it into electrical energy directly in their bodies and other types of energy that they can use. And I think that if we look at the properties, the behavior of these Bigfoot creatures that we call paranormal, a lot of it would make sense given their huge mass and size and often their proximity to water, that they're able to generate energy directly from their environment, exactly the way that Pollock says. And this creates a type of cascading coherency where they're able to take this coherent structure phase of water and turn it into a type of coherent energy. There's this recent article in New Scientist magazine. It says sound laser. This is from March 2024, March 15th. Sound laser is the most powerful ever made. A new device uses a reflective cavity and a tiny bead and electrode to create a laser beam of sound particles. 10 times more powerful and more narrower than other phonon lasers, phonons being sound particles. So you have it right here that they said that you can direct sound in a narrow beam. This is very unlike sound that you and I are used to hearing around us, which, kind of sound spreads out, it goes off in all directions. This is like focused sound like a laser, something that Bob Greenyer refers to as a Saser instead of a light amplitude, stimulated emission. A radiation, it's a sound amplitude stimulated emission, a Saser. So basically, this is sort of what we see around some of these cryptids, is this very focused energy, this very focused loud sounds. It's directed. People say that this incredible terror that they feel around these creatures is something that they feel is coming from outside them, like it's being projected. And this would say to me, it sort of suggests that these Bigfoot creatures are able, one way they could do it is they're taking radiant energy from their environment, ambient radiant energy, incident radiant energy, absorbing it, which is why, as absorbing electromagnetic energy, the areas around them would seem darker than usual. And then they use this in some way to convert it into their own coherent matter waves and project it out again as sound, as fear, even as orbs and different light phenomena that people see around Bigfoot. So I think we can see that there really is some interesting science behind this. This is not just something that we don't have any idea what it is. It's interesting when you read Pollock how controversial even structured water was in his own field. He said he invited a researcher, Gerald Ling, to University of Washington once, and he was told that this was a controversial figure. Even sponsoring him to give a talk could have a negative impact on Pollock's career. So we've always been dealing with this type of controversy, even around nuts and bolts science. It shouldn't be any different in these particular phenomena that we tend to look at on this channel. And I think Pollock gives us some pretty good ideas about how nature's organisms could collect and generate electromagnetic energy simply from absorbing the energy in their environments, light, and he says sound, absorbing sound to generate electromagnetic energy, create charge separation. And from charge separation, we get to charge clusters, which can turn into micro ball lightning, orbs, exotic vacuum objects, ectons, whatever you would like to call them. But they're all really the same thing, this type of plasmoid type energy. So I think we can see there's a connection between structured water and this plasmoid type energy, whether we see them in orbs, whether we see them around Bigfoot or cryptids, UFOs, that this is something that can be naturally generated in our environment, right from the processes that Pollock is talking about. Anyway, those are my thoughts about it. I'm always interested in your comments. Put your ideas in the box below. Thanks again for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Take care for now, and bye-bye.